Right, we're talking about onboard diagnostics. Right, the first onboard diagnostics come about in 1981. They were a manufacturer-specific sort of a thing. So what I mean by that is every manufacturer had their own system. So not only did they have their own their own plug for their own scan tool, but all the codes could only be read by that manufacturer. So if you had a Mitsubishi, you needed to take it to Mitsubishi to get it fixed. Their primary focus back then was looking at wiring and parts issues. Wiring and parts, so it was mainly just to keep the cars going. The systems were pretty basic, and independent garages couldn't access them, so it wasn't a great system. In 1996, I think it was mainly driven by the emissions and smog and stuff in California. They come up with onboard diagnostics 2, which is the system we still use today. Okay, that standardised everything. Their biggest concern was harmful emissions. Harmful emissions was priority number 1 for these guys, which is carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, particulate matter, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen. All these things bad for the atmosphere, bad for you, and the right doses will kill you. So the primary focus of OBD2 was to monitor the various sensors that look after these things. So what they did with OBD2 is they standardised the plug for a start. So you got your 16-pin plug, which is the one we've just showed you a picture of. 16-pin plug. It's a standard configuration. Looks a bit like that with all your little pins in it, and it's generally within 600 millimeters of the steering wheel. It should be. You get the odd manufacturer who hides it away, but most people put it where you can see them nowadays, so they're easily accessible. Now that came about in 1996, but didn't really sort of filter down to about the year 2000. So it's about the year 2000 you'll find pretty much everything has got one of these plugs, and it'll be within half a meter of the steering wheel. Right, so our system's continually being monitored, and it's got 2 priorities. So it's monitoring for 2 priorities. Number 1, first and foremost, is your emissions. Anything to do with your emissions is monitored constantly. So it's always checking anything that can do with the emissions. Temperature sender unit is crook and it makes your car run rich, oxygen sensors crook, anything like that. It's going to come up with a code straight away. So those are the ones it's looking for all the time. There's other codes that it's only going to check every drive cycle, fuel level, things like that. So there's high priorities and low priorities. So there's 2 of them. So high and low. Right. If it strikes a problem, what it's going to do is light up a mill, what they call a mill. Most people call it engine check light. It's going to throw up a code, and it's going to start with a P, or it's going to start with a B, or a C, or a U. So P will indicate a powertrain issue, so it's something to do with the engine, transmission, something like that. B is a body code, So that's going to be airbags, SRS, something like that. C is chassis. So that'll be ABS, anti-lock brakes, something like that. And U is going to be communications. So that's a communication error, so that's going to be a fault with our CAN bus system. Alright, so it's going to come up with those numbers first, and then you're either going to have a 0 or a 1. If it's a 0, it's a generic OBD2 code. If it's got a 1 in it first, then it's going to be a manufacturer's code. Alright, so it's going to be specific to that car. So some codes are going to be generic, as in any scan tool can read them, and you're going to get them on any car. Other codes, if they've got a 1 in them first, that's going to be specific to that manufacturer. So it could be a Volkswagen code, or it could be a BMW code, or whatever. And then it's got 3 numbers will come after that. So that'll indicate the system and the circuit where the fault is. So that gives you an idea where to look. You look up those codes and it'll give you an idea where to look. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to tell you exactly what the problem is, but it'll give you a starting point. Somewhere to look. Right, just have a little talk about the CAN bus system. CAN bus, we touched on it earlier. So it's a communication controlled area network. Controlled area network. Okay, that's your CAN, and the bus is just the system we use. All right. So what it is, it's two wires. Two wires intertwined. So we've got 2 wires wrapped around each other. Now we that's so it doesn't pick up interference off your radio and bits and pieces like that. So we talked about this before earlier on, how your control units are all talking to each other. You know, your PCMs yakking away to your transmission and your ABS. It's all communicating through these CAN bus lines. But what it also does is it allows your sensors to talk to more than one unit. So, for example, you might have a throttle. Throttle's a good one. Throttle position sensor. Now your ECU. Your engine computer, that needs to know where your throttle is, so it can operate your engine. But also your transmission also needs to know where your throttle is, so it can change gear at the right time, and it knows whether you're on and off the gas. You can't be changing gear when you've got your foot flat to the boards or anything like that. So this allows our throttle position sensor to talk to two computers at the same time, 2 control units at the same time. All right. So the CAN bus system is a great communicator. It's also it saved a lot of weight in the cars, because we used to use a copper wire, rolls and rolls of copper wire going to this, to that, and back again. Whereas now we can use these CAN bus lines, and communication just travels backwards and forwards on them, and it can be a whole lot of different communications going all at the same time down the same line. So it's a great system, and it's revolutionised the way that cars are wired up nowadays. Right, just a little talk about these things again. I don't know if you've ever had it on a car where that engine check light has come on, your mills come on, and then it's just gone off by itself. Now the reason they do that is you've got a fault, what we call intermittent. So it's just a fault that's popping up occasionally, and it's been recognised, and it's popped that light on. Now if it doesn't fault again for another 3 drive cycles, that light will go off, but it will record the code. The code will stay in the memory, alright? So 3 cycles. So what I mean by a cycle is, that's just, you start the car, you warm it up, you drive. Okay, so you accelerate, you cruise, you decelerate, accelerate again, decelerate, stop, turn it off. That's one cycle. So if you got up in the morning, drove to work, that's one cycle. Drive down the shop, there's another cycle. Drive to another shop, there's another cycle. You come home, you've done 4 cycles by the time you get home. So if you do 3 of those and the fault doesn't reoccur, the light will go off, but it will still stay in the memory. It'll be there. So you can have a look in the memory and see what caused it. So it's still worth having a look to see what actually happened to brought it on, because they don't come on for no reason. Alright, so that's the drive cycle. Right, so what's going to bring our MIL on? Our malfunction indicator lamp, what's going to bring that on and give us that codes? Alright, what's going to trip it? The reasons it's going to come on is, like I said before, anything to do with the emissions, exceeded parameters. So if it's judging that the emissions are going to exceed what they should do, it's going to bring that light on straight away. If any 2 sensors, says bring up codes that don't correspond. Or they conflict. It's a better word. That'll bring that MIL on as well. What I mean by that is if you've got a cam sensor, say, there's your camshaft, there's your crankshaft, got a cam belt connects them together. You've got a cam sensor up here, you've got a crank sensor down there. They're both sending signals back to your PCM. Now those signals normally are going to be in sync because everything is in time. If they're not in sync, PCM is going to pick it up and it's going to come up with 2 fault codes, and it's going to tell you you've got a faulty cam sensor and you've got a faulty crank sensor. Right, that's going to bring that light on. It's going to give you 2 codes. It's going to give you a code for there and a code for there. Now there's probably nothing wrong with those 2 sensors. It's probably here where the issue is this cam belt's too loose and these things are getting out of sync. So that's how you can get tripped up with these things, and you can't just rely on, if you just went and replaced that sensor and that sensor, you're not going to fix the problem. You have to look a bit further, and that's a good example of what does happen quite often. This is really common on this end with the timing chains, the chains stretch, and you get 2 fault codes like that, and everything gets out of sync. Another way you can pick up an issue like that is on your data. If you go into your data on your scan tool, your fuel trim will be way out of whack. Remember how we were talking about before about stoichiometric and lambda 1? Your fuel trim should be 0. You're allowed sort of 10 either side of that 0 for things to come up and down, as in lean or rich. That's your parameters. If you go any higher than 10, say if you look at your fuel trim and it's 40, well then you've probably got a stretched timing chain or something like that. So if you've got a bad fuel trim, you've got a code for here and a code for there, then chances are you've got a chain issue. So this is why you need to know your tool, your scan tool, and this is why you need to know how to use it. It's not just going to give you the answer. You can't just buy a scan tool and just know exactly what's wrong with the car. You have to know how to use it and what to look for. So just a quick talk about the scan tool. I haven't got one here to show you, unfortunately, but there's many different types of scan tools on the market nowadays. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are good for some manufacturers' cars and not others. But basically, they all do a similar job. So what they can do is they access our trouble codes. So they can access our trouble codes. Diagnostic trouble codes is what we quite often call them, or you can call them a diagnostic fault code. That's probably the one we use more often. Trouble codes. So that was the trouble codes I was talking about before, you know, starting with P or B, blah blah. So it gives you an idea of what's going on. The other thing that your scan tool can do for you, it can access your live data. So you can go into it and read exactly what the car's doing. At the moment you can read every little, whatever the scan tool, whatever the onboard computer can tell you, you can read it. You can see what's going on at any one time. Now the other thing you can do is go, if you've got a fault code, you can go into what's called freeze frame data. Freeze frame. So that kind of backtracks to when that code came on. And it'll give you a little snapshot of what the live data was doing a little bit before that code came on and a little bit after that code came on. So you can kind of see if there was a misfire or it was running rich or running lean, they put the code on, whatever happened before and afterwards. So freeze frame is quite handy. The other thing we use it for quite a bit nowadays is recoding keys. Recoding keys and the car's security system. So if you lose a key nowadays, your key is coded to your ECU 9 times out of 10, and it won't start unless that key is actually coded to the computer, and the computer recognises the key. Your car won't go. So we code them up using that as well. It's another common thing we use them for. We reset service lights. So you get your service light on the dash. Some cars you can reset through the dash. Some cars you have to use the scan tool to reset the service light and the service interval on a lot of cars. So it's getting more and more important now. So as you can see, a scan tool in a workshop, you're using it all the time. You pretty much use it even when you're doing an oil change nowadays. You're going to get your scan tool out and check for, reset your service light. You're going to check for these guys and make sure the thing's running right. The other thing you can use it for is actually actuating your actuation. So you can use it and actually go in there and you can drive things. You can turn your fans on. You know, if your fans aren't working and you don't know if it's the fan itself or it's the switch, you can plug your scan tool on, go in and actuate it and turn it on with your scan tool. And if your fan goes, well, you know your fan's fine, but your switch is crooked. So it gives you an idea where to look at and can shortcut things. So they're a pretty handy beast, the old scan tool. There are manufacturer specific ones, but there's a lot of aftermarket ones out there nowadays. And when we get back down to Toa Homai, we'll drag some out and have a play with some. And yeah, you guys are going to love that. It's good fun.